Welcome back to the Bayside Fabrication YouTube channel. All right, today we are going to really focus on the fuel system for this car. We're also going to focus on buttoning up a lot of really small odds and ends. I'll highlight anything important, but a lot of things like small adapters, getting the power steering lines hooked up, I'm just looking at it, a little map sensor block, just a lot of that little stuff really adds up. But we're really going to focus on the fuel system, and I'll go over all the other stuff that I can think of when I get to it. But today, this is going to be the nuts and bolts of our fuel system here. So we have a fuel surge tank here, and what this is a small, I believe it's a 1 gallon. Yeah, I think it's a 1 gallon tank that's gonna hold 2 400 fuel pumps. Now we're running E85 on this car, so it needs a lot of fuel. So my plan is to mount that surge tank into the trunk here and then route everything from there. So I just took the liberty to take off the factory battery tray, and this is where our stock fuel pump is located. Now, I have heard our stock fuel pump is actually equivalent to like a single Bosch 044 pump. They actually flow pretty good amount of fuel. So my thought is to utilize that pump to fill the surge tank. So we'll take the pump, fill the surge tank with the factory pump, and then put our 2 AEM 400s in here. So ultimately, we're gonna have 2 -8 lines that go into a single -10, and that's gonna be our fuel rail feed. Now, we'll go back here, and I've already mounted our fuel pressure regulator, but what's gonna happen is we're gonna have a -10 coming in, a -10 coming out, and splitting back into 2 -8s, and then running a -8 back to the surge tank. So really the way a surge tank works is, you guys can look it up, but essentially there's 3 fittings here, 2 fuel pumps. So one of these fittings is a fuel supply. So this is going to be from our fuel tank. This is going to be a fuel return. So this is going to be a return from the fuel rail after the fuel pressure regulator. And then this fitting here is going to go back to our fuel tank. So essentially this fills up, fuel gets sucked out of here, all the unused fuel comes back into here, and then any overflow goes back into the tank. So long story short, this surge tank always stays full of fuel. And that's the idea behind a surge tank. It's essentially a mini fuel tank that never goes dry. And that's really the best way to do things, especially if you have a track car for like cornering and stuff like that, where you get like fuel sloshing around the tank. This will prevent any intermittent dry spots in the factory fuel system. So it's just an easy way to do things. But what I'm going to do here is just grab, pop these fittings off and see what they are. And then we'll probably, honestly, from the looks of it, they just look like push lock fittings. So we'll just get a couple push locks, and then we'll use those and then just run braided line from there. But it should be a pretty straightforward setup. And then we're just gonna run PTFE lines, braided stainless lines all the way back, because we're gonna be running E85 in this car, so which is 85% ethanol. So when we're running E85, we definitely have to run those lines and ditch any of the factory rubber lines, which there's really actually not many on the factory from this car. So that's kind of what we're doing today, guys. And I'm just going to take a quick little inventory of what we got going on here, figure out where's a good spot to mount that surge tank, and then it's pretty straightforward after that. All right, guys, so check this out. This is one of our AEM 400s. Now, these are the same exact size as a Bosch 044 fuel pump. And these tanks here, these are actually cheapo tanks you can get on Amazon or eBay or anything like that. And I bought them because I had one in my E30 and they just work really well. So there's no point in reinventing the wheel when you can buy something like this for, I think it's like 30 or 40 bucks. So with this style, this can be run either inline or as a drop-in. So this simply drops in, and that's it. There's a little shoulder on here that you can see, and once it hits that, we're good. And then there's a bag here, and essentially there's just an O-ring that seals this with a cap, and that's our fuel pumps. I mean, it doesn't get simpler than that. So that's it, guys. Both pumps installed. We'll just screw them down, and then we will mount this in the car. Okay, just figuring out the mounting for the fuel surge tank here. And I was originally thinking it'd be nice to have it up here and offset the brake booster. However, once you add a fitting on top, it doesn't really quite clear the hood. That would be the ultimate setup, I think. It will look really good, and I don't know, just be a good spot. But down here, it keeps that weight lower. You lose a little bit of your trunk space, which is okay. I mean, it's a street car, but I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where I would love to put it right there. So I'm going to see if I can, you know, maybe if I ditch this bracket and get rid of that one and add a different style bracket, we could do something. Oh, also, big pro tip. If you guys are having a baby and you're in the hospital, you'll recognize these. These are the blankets they give you. And I had a couple rad nurses who were just like, dude, just take as many as you want. I stole, well, I didn't steal. I paid for them. It was a very expensive hospital visit. But I commandeered an ungodly amount of these blankets for the few days we were there. Dad tip. Okay, I made a decision. I'm going to mount it down here. It does take up a little bit of my luggage room, which, believe it or not, I use quite a bit in this car with, you know, transporting the kid around and stuff. I was gonna put it right here, but then I have to cut this, I gotta cut the tabs, gotta re-weld on the tank and blah, blah, blah. And here I just drilled 2 holes in a couple Rivnuts. So, and it keeps the center of gravity much lower. So it's just one of those things where 6 in one, half dozen the other. All right, so what we're gonna do now is Rivnut through the sheet metal here. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with Rivnuts, this is what they are. It's essentially a rivet that's a nut. Haha, good marketing there, obviously. But all it does is this Rivnut, this is an M8 that we're going to be using, threads onto the rivet tool. And then all you do here is pray the hole's big enough, which it isn't. There we go. And you crimp the balls out of it. And you unthread it. And there you go. You got your Rivnut. I can thread any M8 bolt, well, as long as you get the right thread pitch, into that. So, very simple stuff. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Rivnuts, but if not, they are awesome for stuff like this, especially sheet metal, you know, work. Then you're not struggling to try to through bolt it from the bottom side or weld anything. It's just a super simple operation. All right, guys, so here's what we're doing now. I'm actually going to drain the tank of the rest of the fuel that's in it because we're going to be running E85 on this setup. So I'm just going to clean out what's there. That way we know we have a fresh start with fresh E85 and there's not, you know, old gas sitting in it at any point. Also, what we're doing is identifying the feed and return. 50% sure this is the feed and this is the return on the back side here. There's also this vent here. This is the tank vent, which I accidentally snapped off because it was super brittle. But what we're doing now is I have a power probe here. So we just hook up a battery. If you guys don't have one of these, they're incredible. So you go positive, negative, and then if you want to put power to something, or if you want to put a ground to something, you just click a switch here. And I mean, this was like 12 bucks on Amazon or something, but it's a pretty rad deal. So right now I'm going to ground the pump. So this last pin is the ground. And this pin here should be the power. Let's hope we don't get fuel everywhere. There we go. But yeah, we're just filling this sucker up, and I'll put the rest of the fuel in my truck, which certainly will take it, and then we'll have an empty tank and a fresh start. So just also to note, this tank here has a fuel pressure regulator built into it right after the pump, and it also has a fuel filter in it. So I'm just gonna leave these. I probably should check them or clean them or replace them at some point, but the fuel pressure regulator doesn't really matter to us because everything is going right in the surge tank and then coming from the surge tank into the return here. So the fuel pressure regulator on the factory pump side doesn't matter. Now the fuel pressure regulator coming from our surge tank in the twin 400s to our rail, that's the one that matters. So you'll see how I set this up. It's not that complicated. So if we have any fuel issues, it would be from this side of things, because we're not going to have any lack of fuel on the twin 400 side of things. And I'm also going twins because of redundancy. Now, for some reason, one of these pumps crap out, we don't get into a lean situation. It actually should be able to run, I mean, at high horsepower levels, it might get a little dicey, but we should be able to run up to 500 or 600 horsepower on a single one of these pumps. So 2 of them just creates redundancy, and it also creates a ton of fuel. Well, the hardest part of the entire fuel system is routing the lines. Now, what I decided to do was, and this is right under the battery, is just route the lines in the factory, pretty much the factory location. That way everything's nice and tucked up underneath the car. It's kind of a pain because I had to drop the fuel tank just like a little bit. There's just a couple straps holding it. So just like a ½ inch got me the gaps I needed to snake these through. And that's really the hardest part of the whole thing. Everything else is straightforward. There's all these, you can see here, we're just gonna pop through these factory body grommets and try not to punch any unnecessary holes in the car. So that's where we're at. Check out what we got going on now. So I just got the intake manifold back on, and I got the dash 10 PTFE line hooked up to the rear, or all built and ready to hook up to the rear. So check this out, guys. We have a fitting here. This is gonna be our fuel return off the fuel rail. So this is just a cast fitting. And what we're gonna do is just cut these threads off here. And this fitting, we're going to weld right into the end of our fuel rail here. And now this is going to go to the fuel pressure regulator. So we're gonna split this back off into 2 -8s and feed either side of the top of the fuel pressure regulator, and then we'll have a return line back to our surge tank. And I went through a few renditions of where to mount this fuel pressure regulator. It just wasn't working out in a few spots here. I kind of overcomplicated this by having a 10 AN line splitting into 2 8 AN lines so I could feed either side of the pressure regulator. My thought being that it would have the most flow that way. Probably unnecessary to do all that, but anyways, here's our plate that we're making so it can bolt. Looks like it's gonna wind up right in this neighborhood back here. And that way you can still read the gauge nice and easily, and it's just kind of back here and out of the way. So we're gonna bolt this on now and see how everything looks for the line placement. Okay, now we just almost have the fuel system buttoned up. I forgot, actually, one of the most important things, our flex fuel sensor. So what I'm gonna do is just tie in the flex fuel sensor to the 6 AN fuel feed line to the surge tank here. All right, guys, the fuel system is finished for E85. So we got our surge tank here. All I have to do now is just wire up a couple relays to the pumps, and that's done. And I just got to remount the battery. Likely have to trim the bottom of the battery tray a little bit just to get the lines through. And then on the back side here, we have our fuel pressure regulator all plumbed in. Everything's good. And I'm actually just disconnecting everything now because on the next video and the next step is to pull the motor and actually get it like buttoned up and ready to run. So we're gonna go through and make sure all of our bolts are on our valve cover, all of our gaskets are on our intake manifold, all of our plumbing and all of our fittings are tight on the motor. So that's really the next step, is to get the plumbing all sorted out as far as like the coolant lines, the power steering lines. I have all the fittings and everything. It's just a matter of making a couple lines. I do have to make an expansion tank for the cooling system. So that's really the only thing I have left as far as like any kind of larger fabrication work. And I also have to make a catch can of some sort for our valve cover breather. So the catch can will likely be over there. But that's really it. We're at the home stretch here, and we're just gonna pull this thing out. It's just 2 bolts on the main engine mount here, and the front trans is already unbolted and ready to go. So I'm gonna drop this out right now. We're gonna put it on an engine stand, and then we'll put the wiring harness on it and address all these small issues while it's out of the car and easy to work on. And guys, we're getting really close at this point, actually, so I'm getting pretty fired up. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.